Hello, I'm here today with Lawrence Barzau of Vector International. I'm Octavia Overholser, and today we're going to be talking about human rights and environmental due diligence, otherwise known as HREDD. So, Lawrence, could we start off with you telling us just what is HRDD about?
Absolutely, Octavia. I mean, HREDD is human rights and environmental due diligence. And we need to see this as a journey companies embark on, right? So we're not talking about something which happens in one specific moment, but it's really a continuous activity of a company to actually identify, to prevent, ideally, at least mitigate any negative impacts own operations or the supply chain might have on people and the environment.
Okay.
That is HREDD. I know that sometimes these acronyms are a little bit scary for companies, but I would always describe it as a journey. It's not a one-moment thing. You started, you have this as a daily operational task as a company, no matter which kind of company or which size of a company.
Okay, because that was going to be my next question. So actually, who needs to conduct HREDD? I mean, what kinds of companies, what industries, who's it for?
Yes, I think that every company should do that, right? Okay. Ideally, every company does that. Now, of course, there's always this question, but we are a small or medium-sized company, we're a family business. And this sounds like a very complicated thing to do. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of tasks which are coming up to us. And I think we have to differentiate a little bit. We have to look at this from different angles. Now, of course, there's companies which are already in scope of a specific legislation which expects them to perform this human rights and environmental due diligence. Right, we have countries like France, we have countries like Germany, but also Switzerland. We have, as another example, the UK Modern Slavery Act. I mean, this is not always looking at the entire picture of HREDD, but it's taking out elements of it. And what companies need to do, in essence, is basically, ideally, what they should be doing is HREDD. Yeah?
Okay.
So, but what about the companies which are not in scope of a legislation, right? And that's also a big chunk of companies anyway. And many of these companies actually face these expectations through their B2B customers, right? They're working with larger brands and retailers, and these brands and retailers actually expect their business partners to also embark on this human rights and environmental due diligence journey. So this is another part of companies and the economy which need to conduct HREDD. Now there's also companies which have already for quite a long time been embarking on this journey because of intrinsic motivation. We also have to say that, right? Because of the charter maybe they have, and the founders have said, oh, our company needs to work in an ethical manner, in a responsible manner. So we embark on this journey anyway, and so many companies have been doing this already for a long time. So also to say that this concept of this human rights and environmental due diligence is not something completely new as such.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. So, and it can be because of a company's values, or it can be coming from companies, clients or customers who want to see that they're doing something. All right. And does geography matter? I mean, does it make, a difference where a country is based or where their supply chain is?
Yes and no at the same time, right? I think we have to look at different angles. I think when we talk about risk, because at the end of the day, we are talking about managing risk. And every company in the world, wherever it is, in any industry, is facing some kind of risk somewhere, whether they're based in the United States or in France or in Italy or in China or in Australia. It doesn't matter. You always have a certain level of risk. Now, you may have a higher level of risk because of the industry you're in, right? So that, of course, means if you are, for instance, in an industry which is focusing on manufacturing, if you're in agriculture, if you're in mining, right? If you are in an industry which is also depending on, let's say, so-called conflict minerals in the supply chain as a raw material, you should really have a closer look at risks you may have in the area of environment and human rights. If you're a service company, that might be a lower level of risk. For instance, a call center. But we also have sectors in the service industry where companies need to really look at the risks they have. If we look at, for instance, the hospitality sector, there is definitely also higher risks for topics, for instance, forced labor, wages, not meeting minimum statutory levels, etc. So there is no complete risk-free industry. But if you are dealing with certain types of products, or if you are working with suppliers in countries which have a higher level of risk because the governmental enforcement of legislation is weak, because governance is weak, that means that you need to embark on this journey more than other companies.
Yeah, that's clear. Thank you very much. And who would you say needs to be involved internally in an organization in this whole process?
It's quite a lot of people in a company which have to be involved. It is definitely the top management which needs to be involved. They need to actually endorse it fully. They really also make very clear that they commit, and the entire company commits to performing this human rights and environmental due diligence journey. Now, when we look at the different departments, definitely as it becomes more and more a legislated topic, of course, legal departments are involved. Buying departments have to be involved, definitely, because they are selecting the business partners. They are buying the services and products the company needs. So they need to make a good choice, in inverted commas, in terms of they need to understand, if we are talking with a potential new supplier, is the supplier actually willing and able to meet certain criteria when we are talking about human rights and environmental standards, right? And that also has to be monitored. Now, there's also the quality assurance people in a company, which also very often meet with suppliers which look at the products and look at the story behind the product, and also they have to be involved, right? There's also definitely the people in any communication department, because HREDD is also about communicating about what you're doing. You need to report, you need to talk to stakeholders, you need to talk to the public, to your business partners. You need to ensure that also internal communication on this is streamlined and clear. So it's really something where many people in a company have to be involved. It's not something, it's not a task for one single person. There may be, of course, naturally the sustainability departments or sustainability managers definitely are part of this journey. That goes without saying. But what I'm trying to say is that they cannot be left alone with this task to do everything which is needed in order to identify the risks which might be there, to address them, to report about them. That is really a transversal task for many, many different people and departments in any company.
Okay, so they can't do it in a silo. It really has to be a collaborative approach across the company.
Absolutely.
And imperative that there be top-down or approval or desire to do this.
Indeed.
Okay, great.
Indeed.
And so, because cross-functional projects can be challenging within companies sometimes. So what practical steps would you say, a company should be taking to address HREDD? Like, where should they start?
I think to get started, I think first of all is to really ensure what does HREDD really mean, to ensure that these different departments and also the decision makers in a company really understand what are the different elements of this journey. So
they're aligned from the beginning.
They need to have this understanding. It is not to jump directly into something, for instance, oh, let's do some social audits in our supply chain, and then let's see what happens. That might be a very useful step, on this journey. But if you're really starting this journey, you need to have really the solid understanding, what are we actually talking about, and also to see what risks are actually there, right? Which risks are relevant for our company and for our practices actually. So they need to look also at, when we talk about environmental due diligence, for instance, how much does biodiversity actually matter for us, right? Does water matter to us? Waste, climate change? All these topics do not matter to the same degree to every company. So they need to also kind of ideally conduct a materiality assessment, we would say, to really identify those topics within environment and human rights which really matter most for the company, where the impact is also larger. They would need to do this exercise also involving stakeholders. So again, it's not only to have an internal discussion in a company, but also to exchange with stakeholders, external stakeholders such as NGOs or trade unions, for instance, or external experts or other actors to really get a full picture and have a good understanding. And then you may want to create a roadmap. Okay, we have priority topics, and now we start to identify the risks we have there. So of course, it could be really, for instance, sending out questionnaires to their suppliers or their own operation departments and subsidiaries, for instance, to get a first response, how they react to that. Many companies already are doing social audits in their supply chain, so naturally that's a part of identifying risks. And then you get a picture, and companies need to really look at these reports, what they get back from their business partners, and not just file them, but really read through them and understand what kind of risks do we really have, right? Where do risks actually even turn into violations?
Right,
Because
so they might already have the information actually.
Many companies already have lots of this
Okay.
information, and then the next step would be to address these risks, right? That could be identifying the root causes. Why is this violation against human rights there? Why do we have cases of child labor? Why do we have so many people not receiving the minimum wage? Why do we have a non-functioning wastewater treatment, for instance, in our supply chain? What are the reasons for that? Is it a lack of understanding? Is it a lack of knowledge about the topic? Is it a lack of awareness? Or is it a technical problem? Or is something not being measured correctly? And then this can be addressed through training, through building capacities for those people dealing with these topics, that they can actually master these issues, and by doing this reduce the risks. So that is important. And once you have these things in line, so you have your priorities set, you map your supply chain. That's definitely also, of course, naturally something which needs to happen. You identify the risks which are there, you address the risks, and then you are also able to report, because that's also an essential part of this journey, that you talk to stakeholders, external stakeholders, but also your business partners, of course, your customers, your own employees, your shareholders, right? You naturally need to keep your board informed, and your top management. So this is important. But in order to report on something, you need to do these other steps so that you have a substantial element to talk about.
Okay, thank you. So the final outcome is a report, basically, of a summary of where you are in this HREDD journey. Is that correct?
That is one of the outcomes. I would say it's one of the outcomes. I think we really have to bear in mind that the ultimate objective is not the report as such, but the ultimate objective should be to actually prevent and mitigate risks with regards to environment and human rights. So the objective is that we, as a company, for instance, don't see any violations against human rights in our operations on our supply chain. We don't see, or we see a very, very limited level of risk/violations when it comes to environment in our operations and supply chain. That must be the primary goal, because it's about the people, it's about the environment. And of course, the reporting is a tool to inform about this work and keep stakeholders informed about the commitment the company is working on.
Mhm. And presumably then there's also an action plan on how to improve.
Absolutely.
With
Absolutely.
the
I mean, nobody is perfect, and that's normal. I think it's also very important to not misconstrue and misinterpret HREDD as something where the expectation is your company has to be 100% perfect.
Mhm.
The state of total perfection does not exist
No,
naturally.
it doesn't.
So
Yeah.
there's always a risk, right? The key is that you can demonstrate that you are aware of these risks and that you are addressing them timely and effectively, right? So that is also important, that when, as you talk about the action plan, that if you see that there's certain risks which don't go away, right? Or they stagnate, we try to mitigate them. We are trying to reduce, for instance, the amount of excessive overtime in our supply chain, but it somehow doesn't work. So we need to do something differently in order to have a positive impact in terms of reducing this excessive overtime. So maybe, have we been training the right people? Have our training methods or our explanations been clear enough? What else can we do to identify root causes? The root causes for excessive overtime maybe not only how certain factories working, but how we actually order our products, right? Are our buying practices actually enabling our suppliers to be in line with, let's say, standards and expectation levels? So you always need to adjust because you need to measure, right? That is also part of this reporting, that you always measure the impact of how you prevent and mitigate risk. And if you see it doesn't improve, but it stays where it is, or it gets even worse, you need to change something. And that is an essential part of what you need to do constantly in this journey, to see how can we be more impactful, more effective in reducing risk and preventing negative impacts on people and the environment.
Yeah. So companies need to start the journey, but then continue the journey, and on a regular basis, look back to see how they've improved or not.
Yes. This is very, I can only underscore this again and again, that this is really a journey, because I see sometimes that there's this, many companies struggle a little bit with this concept, and they feel this is something, we need to do something and then we are done with it, right? And then we can tick the box and we can sleep at night. But it is really a continuous journey. It does not stop. And I mean, companies have also got used to quality control on all kind of different things, right? Product quality, for instance. That's today, that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, that just happens, right? And I think we have to see HREDD a little bit in that way. This is something you just do. It's natural part of your business, how you do business. It's doing responsible business, and it benefits not only the people and the planet, but it definitely also benefits your own company. You have a much better position also in the market for all kind of different reasons if you're doing this, because it's an expectation of financial markets, of all kind of other different stakeholders, as mentioned before. And you have a stronger relation with your business partners. You are more resilient, and you can navigate more easily through the challenges of the 21st century.
Because presumably, if you know your risks, then you can try and mitigate them and plan for them, right? And
Exactly.
to avoid them.
Exactly.
Now, talking about, there are so many different rules and regulations and codes of conduct and legislation out there. How can companies navigate through all of that when they're looking at their HREDD?
Yes. I think the first thing is take a deep breath. Don't panic. I know there's a lot of legislation out there, and there's a lot of legislation in the pipeline, right? And there's a lot of talk about legislation. I think we have to see that all these different legislations all have the same core. They may focus on specific particular aspects of a supply chain, of a product, or geographically. But in essence, what they all expect companies to do is know your supply chain, know your risks, address the risks, and report about it. And that is exactly the core, which has been basically built by the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, as well as the OECD guidelines for multinational companies, and also the guidelines on responsible business conduct. And these principles which are set there are being reflected on all these different legislations. Take the Norwegian Transparency Act, take the German Supply Chain Act, take the CSDDD of the European Union, take any other example. It is always about map your supply chain, know your risks, address these risks, and talk about it / report on that. So you need to do basically, even if you're in scope of different legislations at the same time, it is basically that you need to do the same exercise in different formats maybe, but it's in essence always the same thing you need to do. So no reason to panic. I think many things can also be simplified, and luckily there's also particularly when it comes to the corporate sustainability reporting directive of the EU, for instance, there's also a strong collaboration with the Global Reporting Initiative. Just as an example to show that also there's discussions about how can we make it easier for companies to report against different standards without repeating the work again and again and again. Right?
Yes, so sometimes it seems like it might just be in a different format, or
indeed, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so to that effect, I mean, because I think you're saying don't panic, but I think for some companies this can be really kind of overwhelming, right?
Yes.
And between the legislation, between how do you start this journey, what do you do? So where can companies find help? Who can assist companies, with this HREDD journey?
I think there's a number of different actors who can help. I mean, there's of course external experts which can help. There's tool providers, there's platforms, there's business associations, there's also NGOs. I mean, it always depends on where companies need help on which particular topic, and actually Vectra can help, of course, right? I mean, that's our home turf, and we can definitely also help in many different respects. I would maybe like also to highlight that when companies embark on this journey, a lot has to do with gathering data, gathering information, right? What's the water use in our supply chain? How much waste do we have in the supply chain? What happens with this waste, and who deals with this? And measuring things like, again, overtime hours and wages, and information on recruitment practices in light of forced labor, child labor prevention, for instance. So you have to gather a lot of data. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if you're a small company with a relatively small supply chain, you may be able to tackle all this in an Excel spreadsheet, for instance, but you quickly come into an area where this is not sufficient. So you might need something more sophisticated to gather this data, to connect this data and all that. And for this, for instance, there's also providers out there who can perform that and who can help. So the message is that no company needs to do this fully alone. And I think from our Vectra perspective, I think it's important to enable companies. That's also how we understand also our work in this context, that we enable companies to embark on this journey and that they learn how to manage this on their own. Make them independent and manage these topics, that everybody in the company knows what he or she has to do. There's policies in place, there's procedures in place, and this kind of division of labor in the context of HREDD is clear to the people in the company, and they do it by themselves as an ongoing process. Okay. Again, there's all kind of different providers and organizations which can help with different aspects, also when it comes to environment, when it comes to social, when it comes to governance-related topics as well.
So Vectra can provide a roadmap for them to start their journey.
Definitely. I mean, we are always very happy to help companies, to help them identify what really matters to them, have a look at their practices, their current practices, identifying any potential gaps which might be there, help them to establish these policies and procedures, a strategy, establish this roadmap to then, again, and I repeat myself, really identify risks, address them, report, because it is a complex task with different layers and involving many different actors and stakeholders internally and externally. And definitely we're happy to help companies navigating through this and become independent in this and manage this by themselves.
Great. Okay, sounds like it's clear. Thank you for clarifying. Indeed, what seems like a big complex issue sounds like it can also be broken down, and it's important to companies work collaboratively together to find, start their journey. And
indeed. I think this is the most important thing. I'm not trying to say this can all be done in an afternoon, right? It is a relatively large task, but it's manageable, it's doable, and the art is to slice it into manageable pieces and to really understand that as a journey, it's a roadmap. You don't have to do all this in one go. Step by step, follow this roadmap, and then you'll be fine. And that's actually also what for instance, legislators and stakeholders are also saying. I mean, they don't expect a company to do that within a week or so, but the expectation is that companies are embarking on this journey, at least. That is important. Get started with it. Start somewhere.
And I think what you said was that the most important is that it, just by doing this, allows companies to meet legislation requirements, and then also can help their business, because by knowing their risks, they become more resilient. And so they can also make sure that they, ensure that they can be more profitable in the future by not having challenges or issues within their supply chain or within their company.
Indeed, and and again, it's really important to understand that also the financial markets, that investors are looking into this. So if you want to have a loan in the future, and if you look into the conditions you may get and you can negotiate, you're always in a better position if you can demonstrate that you've embarked on this HIEDD journey. Yeah? So it is not only about legislation and avoiding any sanctions such as fines or being excluded from a public procurement process or whatever. It is also the financial world which is expecting companies to do that. And again, for many companies, also the business partners, and it's the society. It is since years, I would say, no longer the question if this is something companies need to embark on. No, the if question is no longer there. The answer is yes. There is no other answer. It is yes. The question is just how, right? How can I most effectively and efficiently embark on this journey? That's the key today. But there is so many options and guidance and support opportunities that no company needs to be afraid of that.
Okay, great. And it sounds like Vector can definitely help.
Yes, so absolutely. Pleasure. Yes, indeed.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Lawrence, for your time today. And appreciate
You're very welcome.
it.
Thank you, Octavia.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.